Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Elevated, the monthly podcast from Caltech Center for Technology and Management Education, where we uncover insights from industry leaders like our guest today, Leslie Fine, and explore their journeys in project management and beyond. I'm Jen Garcia, your new host and AI tools instructor here at Caltech CTME. In my career, I've managed a number of projects, and I'm still, of course, managing projects in my personal and professional life. Today's guest is Leslie Fine, a Caltech Ph.D. in game theory and behavioral economics, a serial startup founder, and a seasoned product leader. Leslie founded her first startup, Crowdcast, in 2008 and went out to build and lead product at several other institutions and companies before making the leap into enterprise, joining Salesforce as VP of Product. There, she helped launch their first AI product and dove deep into M&A integration, and now is the managing partner at Enjoy the Work. Ultimately, the call of early stage innovation pulled her back, and Leslie is a wonderful problem solver who now mentors founders and brings her insight and experience into everything she does. And we're excited to hear from her today. Welcome, Leslie.
Thanks for having me, Jen. I really appreciate the kind words.
Awesome. Well, we're going to dive deep into it. But first, I want to know, I want to hear your origin story.
Hmm.
Behavioral economics, game theory, Caltech. Tell us how you got to that space first.
Yeah. So I graduated college a very, very long time ago, and was curious about sort of where law and economics intersected. And I wound up getting a research analyst position, as so many people do out of liberal arts colleges, at a firm called the Law and Economics Consulting Group, or LECG. And that was a firm in DC and in Berkeley run by folks like David Teese and Laura Tyson, professors at Berkeley, who were doing economic consulting for major legal cases. So we got to work on things like the Microsoft antitrust case in the 90s, the asbestos case, deregulating power. And I was doing lots and lots of the analysis for this. And I was debating whether or not I wanted to go get an MBA, whether I wanted to go to law school. I was kind of sitting in that intersection. And my boss and mentor at the time started telling me about this weird thing called game theory. And it just turned me on immediately. And he was like, well, there are a couple people doing it, but there's this one weird school that's really, really focusing on game theory. Have you ever thought about moving to California? I was living in DC at the time. And I actually, on a bet with my then boyfriend, now husband, applied to Caltech and a few of the other sort of more luminary schools. And the bet was I would get in nowhere. And I lost the bet. Came out to Pasadena and spent the next 4 years in Baxter Hall, having my brain completely rewired. It completely changed the way that I thought about the world, the way I saw strategy, the way I saw cooperation.
Wow, I love that. And so tell us any stories from Caltech that you'd like to share, because we do have some Caltech alum here. Any highlights of your time on campus?
Yeah, I mean, I'll double down on what I just said about rewiring my brain. It was the first day of my first game theory class, and it was taught by a guy named Peter Ordashuk. I think at the time, and this is definitely dating myself a little bit, there was a whole lot of new countries being created in the former Soviet bloc area of the world, and Peter's side gig was writing constitutions. So that's the kind of guy we're talking about. And he came into class and he was like, everyone in this room is about to go crazy. Because insanity means that you are looking at the world that everybody else is looking at, and you do not see the same thing. And I'm going to teach you things will make it that you never see the world the way that you did before. And this seemed grandiose, and it was exactly right. Once you start thinking about the world as a set of decisions made in risk and uncertainty, and people as rational responders to the environment around them, it changes everything. It changes how you think about everything from seating at a dinner party to which bathroom stall you should go into when you go into one of those rooms with lots and lots and lots of doors, to how you make a project plan happen, to how you create tribalism within your company. It becomes the framework by which you see everything.
Wow. So actually, that leads us right into some framework questions. I do want to know more about your story and the through line there, but we'll return to that.
Happy
Tell
to.
me, yes, because it's so varied your experience, and yet there is a through line, and I want to hear more about that. Tell me how tell me how that through line of your career, what's informed all of your decisions after having left Caltech? Because you have a wide variety of experience, and I'd like you to also share about that experience too.
Yeah, yeah, I'll come back to the narrative a little bit. I was lucky enough to be one of John Ledger's students, and he was my best description of him as an advisor is he's more of a softball coach than an academic advisor. Like he, had a go get 'em slugger attitude. And he was not as rigid about, well, you must be an academic. He was much more about chasing curiosity. And when I was finishing, I had that choice to go become an academic or not. And the Bay Area was calling. This was, I now I'll explicitly date myself. This was 2000. It was the apex of Web 1.0. There's all kinds of interesting stuff happening here. My husband, who we got married at the Athenaeum, my husband had an opportunity to join Bill Sharp's company, Financial Engine. So, like, we decided that we wanted to be here, and therefore, industry was the way to go. I landed at HP Labs and had the opportunity to work on what we called at the time information dynamics. So, this was the birth of LinkedIn and Facebook, and understanding how information spread in graphs, and understanding the incentives and how we could aggregate information. We built, if people on the call are familiar with prediction markets, we built corporate versions of those. So I got very, very interested in information flows, which is sort of a little bit of an offshoot of behavioral economics and game theory. But the way information flowed, the way people strategically held information became very interesting to me. So much so that HP encouraged use the three Ps to patent, to prototype, and to publish. And I got really excited about those, but I also got excited about the fourth P, building product. And so I took some of our experiments and our patents, and I started actually implementing them inside the company. HP Labs doesn't have a P&L. We have no way to make money. And so people started reading about this and saying, hey, I want that. And like I had to rejigger all kinds of weird stuff to be able to sell things. Like I got $100,000 PO from an airline in Europe to do this, and they were like, we have no way to file a PO. So that inspired me to make a deal and to spin that IP out into what became my first startup. I think the one of the big through lines here from Caltech into that is I want people to actually play with my toys. A lot of sort of pure academics are happy designing the mechanism. I want to see what happens when humans interact with it. And that is so much of what product really is about, is like, I have an idea of a thing that could be great, and I want to see what happens when I put humans with it and make it even better.
That leads me to thinking about the act fast and break things, or act fast and make things, a little mantra that's going on around now. How would you, knowing what you know about product development and product management, how would you advise those who are following that type of mantra right now? What couldn't they keep in mind to do it wisely, to act fast wisely?
Yeah, thinking fast and breaking things works if you spend a little time on that first word. Like that doesn't mean just create chaos. The product leader mantra that I've always held on to more tightly is that you should have strong beliefs weakly held. So having a strong hypothesis, being somewhat scientific about what does good look like? If this works, if we are all like drinking champagne and toasting to the success of whatever the thing is, whether it's a dinner party or a product or what have you, if we're drinking to its success, what's true? Great. Now I've
Mm.
got an idea of what that castle on the hill looks like. How is that different from today? What would need to be true for us to get there? And then once you have that, what would need to be true, you're starting to build a work backwards plan of like, well, in order to get to that castle on the hill, I would need to create a path. In order to have a path, I might need to find a place where the grade looks like this, and so on and so forth. We can stretch that analogy as much as you'd like. By doing that, I then start to be able to get into leading indicators. So what would I need to know? Let's say we're talking about something that's a year off. That's like too long to actually hold yourself accountable. What would I need to know a quarter from now to believe that I am on the path to getting up to that castle on the top of the hill? And then the other, which I am borrowing liberally from Annie Duke, she wrote a wonderful book called Quit. She was she is a World Series of champion, a World Series of poker champion, works first round capital. She talks about quit criteria. What would have to be true for you to abandon this idea? So if you can, just to come back to your question, the thinking fast and breaking things only works if you build a reasonable model of the world of what does success look like? How would I know that
Mm.
I'm on the way? And what would help me objectively quit? And doing that before you start, and you're not in this like path dependence and falling into the endowment effect of, well, now I'm deep in this project. I'll just give it one more week. So having that discipline at the front will allow you to break things along the way.
That reminds me of another interview I watched of yours where you were talking about founders being in the wrong stage when they're building. Can you talk a little bit about that here?
Sure. So my work today, I'll just give a little framing of the kind of things that we do. So I'm part of a firm called Enjoy the Work. We are all former founders, most of us former CEOs that believe deeply that there's a difference between those two words. To be a founder means that you have some kind of magic, right? You see the world differently than other people. Referencing back to my Ortishuk story, you can rally people to that purpose. You probably have some level of charisma or determination. These are all personality traits. A great CEO, or really a great product manager and project manager, since we're talking to an audience of those today, has a set of skills. And a great CEO can run a meeting, can hold people accountable, can create a culture, can negotiate a deal, can hire well. So, what Enjoy the Work focuses on is how does a great founder become a great CEO and mature along the way so that their company can do more than just build a thing people want, but become a great company around it. So, with that as preamble, when we talk about know your stage, there's a natural life cycle to sort of the company journey. There's problem identification. Is there a blank space in the world? Then there's solution, right? The canonical product market fit. Have I actually built a thing that allows us to solve that problem? Then sorry, I just saw the reference. There is a little bit of Peter Schwartz in here. I think sort of, yeah. Peter and I have talked a lot. I actually once got to do an interview, sort of a dueling interview with him on this exact topic. So good call, Mike. Back to this, and I'll try not to get distracted by the chat. Remind me where I was, Jen.
Oh, so you were in the middle of telling of talking about the
The
stages
journey,
in founder.
yes. Thank you. This is what happens when I look at the chat. So you identify a problem, great. You identify a solution. This is the canonical product market fit, right? This is I now have a thing that seems to solve this problem, at least for some white hot center. Great.
Mm.
That comes before, do I have a business model that can deliver that reliably? Right?
Mm.
Until I actually have a solution, worrying about how I'm going to price it or what my COGS are or what my CAC to LTV ratio is, like, there's no point in worrying about all of that until you have a solution that people love. Someone would kick and scream if you took it away. until you have that person that says, please, God, don't turn this service off, there's no point in refining your business model. And from there, there's no point in talking to people. Love to all of a sudden have partnerships, channel strategy. I'm going to sell through these people. If you do that before, I know this is going to be kind of like um, a chain, before you've identified a problem, before you found the solution, before you've demonstrated a viable business model, and now all of a sudden you're negotiating with IBM for them to sell your product and you haven't done those first three things, you're just going to get whipped around. You're going to disintermediate yourself from your customer. You're going to sign long-term contracts that don't allow you to short-term iterate. You're going to get very distracted by their sales cycle. And so what we often see is people stepping out of stage and tripping over themselves. I'm optimizing my pricing, but actually no one really loves the product yet. I've built a product, but we haven't actually gotten really crisp about what it is, the problem that we see in the world. We can't articulate it crisply. So we're really big on whether it's a founder or PM, understanding the stage that you're in and living in it. And that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. It's basically cross that bridge when you get there type of mentality rather than jumping ahead when you really shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Um, how has your time as VP? It was data analytics, which is now AI.
Mhm.
How did your role there as first VP of that department inform what you're doing now in advising founders?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, at the time we didn't have sort of AI as a discipline inside Salesforce or really in very many companies. So it became that. I had the pleasure of launching the first Salesforce Einstein products, some propensity scoring and send time optimization for Marketing Cloud. At the time, Marketing Cloud was sending approximately 2 billion emails every day on behalf of Salesforce's customers. Every single one of those had about 50 pieces of metadata off of them. The kind of computer that received it, the time of day, what the content was, da, 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 da. You can imagine the list of information you have about that email gets quite long. And so that's, a lot of signals on a daily basis, 100 billion data signals on a daily basis. And it was a playground of what is it that we can do to help marketers understand their audience and help the audience receive the content that they're actually interested in. So, so many lessons there. Probably the first that focuses on the story I just told. There are a lot of technical founders and there are a lot of technical PMs. I'm sure a lot of people on this call being Caltech are quite technical. And so we tend to lead with the technology, the how can we do the thing, the what is possible and what is actually correct. And I'm here to tell you that your customer doesn't actually care. What they care about is, are you solving a problem they have? And the example of this at Salesforce was when we were building propensity scores. I don't want to go into all the geekery of how a propensity is different than a probability. Trust me that it is. um, we were saying, how likely is it for someone to unsubscribe, to click, to purchase, right? Like these are the things that a marketer wants to know about the email that they just sent. And people kept reinterpreting it as a probability. And we're like, no, 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 it's a propensity. And I would like do webinars about like, what does that mean? And they were long, you'd click on the little I above the score and it would give you like a dissertation on what is a propensity score because that was correct. And that did not work. That just alienated my customer. Eventually, what we landed on was we didn't even label it propensity or probability. It was just a number out of 100 with a kind of fuel gauge style dial that went green, yellow, red. So people could look at it, see a number, see if their dial was in the green or yellow, and that's all they needed. And so there was a huge lesson there on simplicity and meet your customer where they are. People aren't using your product to get a lecture on what is accurate.
I love how easy that is. That just it's so satisfying to just see that, move on. You don't have to be taught right now. You can do the research later, but that what a useful solution. So moving back to the frameworks and how you're advising these a lot of these founders who are building who are providing products or services or what have you. Um, let's talk about the cognitive bias that you've mentioned and spoken about before. How does that derail their plans in building that problem solution and moving across that framework?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are cognitive biases littered across any time we build anything. I think the one that we were talking about here is the endowment effect. Is the
Mm,
idea that once I'm deeply involved in something, it's very easy to rationalize, well, let me just continue it. And this is where that working backwards honesty helps an awful lot of, is it realistic for me to cross this gulf between where I am and where I need to be with the evidence that I have?
mm,
All endeavors are discovery processes. You're learning about what is the underlying distribution of what will actually happen. It's sort of a dynamic programming problem. And so, at what point do you know enough about the reality of the world to change your decision? And again, to quote Annie Duke, to quit is sort of a key thing. I also am a really big believer in goal setting on almost everything. One of the coming back to the Salesforce lesson, Salesforce was dogmatic about goal setting. They use a process called the V2MOM. It stands for vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures. Where are you trying to go? What are the principles you'll hold dear? What is the work that you will do to get there? What is likely to get in your way? Let's name your demons. And how will we measure success? I don't care if people use that or OKRs, which I tend to use more now, or BHAGs. Like there's a million different frameworks. Do not care which one you use, but use one because they will keep you honest. So they
mm,
will also create alignment. It can feel really, really pedantic to write this stuff down. You're like, we all agree. Like everybody knows. Everybody knows what we're trying to do. But do they really? Like the number of times that I talked, this just happened yesterday, talking to a founder. He was concerned, and this is a rocket ship of a startup. Like they are tripling year over year. Like they're doing great. And he was like, my PM, my designer, and my head of customer success are having like a hard time building a roadmap. And the first thing I asked him, and it was one of these annoyingly simple questions that he was like, ah, crap. I said, if I took all three of them and I locked them in separate rooms, so leaning on a little game theory, sort of prisoner's dilemma style, like, and I said, what are the three most important things to, I won't say the name of the company, this year? Would you get the same answers? And he thought about it for a
mm,
while. He's like, no, I don't think I would. And I said, and if you did, would they be in the same order? And he was like, oh, definitely not. So the working backwards trick works partially because we all agree as a tribe, because your team, your company, your family, whatever group we're doing this for, is a tribe. And tribes are sort of one of the great markers of a tribe is a common goal. So if you can state declaratively, like, this is what we all want, a lot of things become a whole lot simpler. And so that's
mm,
exactly what that founder needed to go do. And then and only then can you say, okay, cool. We now agree what good looks like. What is the work that needs to be done to get us there? And that helps us avoid the what we call expectations rather than agreements. Are you familiar with that phrasing?
mm. Please, for our audience and me a little, explain.
Yeah. So expectations are unstated, and when someone misses our expectations, we're disappointed. And when someone meets our expectations, we're merely satisfied, right? So if you think about, I don't know if you have a partner, but imagine if when you went to bed, you expected them to unload the dishwasher and you wake up in the morning and the dishwasher is not empty. You're annoyed. They come down for coffee and you're already pissed off because they disappointed you. And if they did unload it, you're like, cool, they unloaded it. Great. That's very different than saying to that person, hey, I'm real tired and this is important to me. Could you unload the dishwasher before you go to bed? And then they get a choice. Either they're like, my back really hurts and I got an early morning meeting. It's just gonna have to wait. Cool. We just had an agreement. Or they're like, yeah, no problem. And then in the morning, when they've done it, you get to say, thank you for doing that. Or like, hey, we had an agreement. Now, this isn't so much about the dishwasher, but you can imagine the same thing in a corporate setting. By getting really clear, explicit agreement of what good looks like, now when someone meets, someone can say yes or no. They have agency to opt in and say, yes, I can do that. Now we have a social contract. Or they can say, no, I can't, and here's why. And now we're working backwards from the gap of like, what is it about that's happening for you on this project that makes it impossible for you to reach this goal? And what is it I
Mm.
can do as your manager, as your leader, as your product person to help you close that gap? But when we have tacit expectations, we never have that conversation. Now, if
Yeah.
they say, yeah, I can do it, and they don't, I have a reasonable reason to have a feedback conversation rather than just walking around being like, oh, Jen's a disappointment.
Yeah, I love that. And so thank you for giving me some fodder for my conversation with my fiance about why he should do the dishes for us. Thank you very much. And I
Yeah.
get to tell him that a game theorist told me this, so I have even more. It's even more legit. Um, so earlier you had talked about so thank you for sharing that somewhat spicy story regarding lessons learned from situations like that where there's either miscommunication or customers expectations are not being met. Any other spicy stories that you can share that are that you've experienced with Enjoy the Work and various founders that you're talking to?
Oh gosh, spicy. Um, I've had to negotiate more than one co-founder breakup. Uh, I'm not going to name names here, but it happens a lot. More companies die from suicide than homicide. Or it's a founder board breakup. Companies, teams need prenups too. And so that's been one of the really big lessons is we don't write contracts or come up with agreements for the times that everything goes well. And it's okay to talk about what's going to happen if something doesn't go well so that we can at least be civilized about it.
Mm.
I had a company where that wasn't the case, and they wound up in months and months and months of arbitration. And they could have left friends. They are now as close to sworn enemies as civilized humans can be. And that was entirely avoidable if they could have had the uncomfortable conversation earlier on.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oof, I feel that. I feel that. Oof. So going back to shifting back to project management and how your experience with at Salesforce and your experience there, how has that so when you were there, you integrated about, you said 20 various acquired AI startups within that role. First of all, how did you do that? From a project management standpoint, that sounds like a nightmare. How did you do that in a way that your whole team was able to do well? And tell us any stories that you have about that process and all that. Was it 20 plus or I heard 18
Well,
to
let's
19 or
avoid the
20.
word I. We acquired 20 AI startups in that 2018, 2019 period. So, I don't want it to sound like I was particularly involved in a few of them. And, I think the two biggest challenges in that was one, understanding the cultural assimilation part of this.
Mm.
They were, Salesforce has a very particular culture, and helping the CEO integrate into that without giving up what it is that made his company unique and why we wanted it in the first place, was a huge challenge. Everything from, and we needed an acronym disambiguator, right? Like, what is a 2RR? Well, it's a two release roadmap, and Salesforce does three releases a year. So when we do the two release roadmap, it's 2 days, dog and pony shows where we talk about what's going to happen over the next 6 to 9 months. And here's what's expected in those, like, just those things that whatever culture you're in. And I think the lesson here is whatever culture you're in, realize it's weird and possibly a little bit culty to anybody else who walks into it. You have verbal shorthands. That's what makes us a tribe, right? You have rituals. There's so many religious metaphors to how a company works, that really learning empathy for if somebody else lands from another planet into that tribe, it's going to be confusing as hell. And so, starting with the empathy of how confusing and overwhelming that is before you're even talking about the technical integration was one of my big lessons. And not only because that's kind, but because it made them trust me more. So I'll remember this one point where the CEO who we just acquired was invited to Hawaii. Salesforce has a tradition of taking their most senior executives to Hawaii once a year, and it's work, right? Like you're in paradise in a windowless conference room for like 8 hours of the day, and then you get some fun. But it's sort of the big exec summit, and the invitation said something like "Aloha Business Casual," and he was like, "What in God's name does that mean?" And I was like, "Okay, let's make you a Pinterest board of like what it is one wears to this, so you'll be accepted." So I think it's just really important to recognize that companies are cultures. Is probably one of the biggest learnings. The other that I worked on quite a bit was at the time what we called then public cloud, what we now just call the cloud, was pretty controversial at Salesforce, right? Like those of you who know your enterprise software history know it thinks of itself as the cloud company. But really, when that became a thing 25 years ago, what that meant was we'll own the data center, not you. The all of these startups we bought were on AWS, a couple on GCP at the time. GCP was pretty nascent. And the level of distrust inside the company of putting data on AWS's iron was profound. And it was sort of amusing to me that like the exact value prop you gave to our customers is what you're now afraid of. And so learning how to educate people on that and help them figure out what it is that they weren't trusting so that you could put in place sort of both a combination of facts and systems to help them trust was really pivotal.
Hmm. Well, so it sounds really exciting, the what you were doing with the team at Salesforce. How did you, what personal goals did you have that made you decide it was time to move on and to do your own thing again? How did you make that transition?
Yeah, couple things. There was a conversation with my manager, the then GM of Marketing Cloud. For those of you who don't know, Salesforce is divided up into cloud, sales cloud, service cloud, marketing cloud, and each one of those would be probably a Fortune 100 business at this point, right? Like they're all behemoths. So GM of Marketing Cloud was concerned with how much empathy I had for the acquired CEO. And he said, you've gone native, you've become one of them. And like I'll never forget how red-faced he was. And I was like, yeah. Well, first of all, there's no them. They are part of us. And I was like, oh,
Mm,
you're really seeing this as a combative thing. Like we are the Borg and you shall be assimilated. Like that does not work for me. Uh,
mm,
and two, damn straight. Yeah, like I completely empathize with them. Like those are the people with the spark and the excitement that are changing things that I want to be a part of. And
mm,
while there are other sort of career reasons, that was sort of the moment that I said, I actually want to be back in the startup ecosystem. Uh,
Mm.
Man, I did not have the juice to start another one. I'd done four startups. I know how lonely it is, how exhausting it is, how existential it is. I had young kids and a dog and a house, and I like didn't want that for my life. And so I started shopping. Um, if you are a female with a PhD and a Salesforce pedigree, there is not a Series B, C, D data-driven startup that doesn't want to talk to you, right? Like
Mm.
it's sort of the hiring equivalent of no one gets fired for buying IBM. They were like, oh wow, a woman with a degree who can do product, and they wanted me to come in and be their CPO. And often the first CPO, since the CEO had been sort of sitting in that chair, and it was always a lot of risk, not enough return, and the overwhelming feeling that I would be a nanny for somebody else's baby. That
Mm.
and that, no matter what I did in those roles, it would be like not quite what was in the CEO's head, and that didn't feel set up for success.
Mm.
I also had a lot of venture conversations. And while VCs are a very important part of our ecosystem, it really became very clear to me how much that is a finance job. I didn't want to be in finance. I didn't want to be a deal flow person. Like that's not where I wanted to be. And I was telling this over drinks to a friend of mine, who, when I said, I'm loose in the saddle, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I'm kind of like having a lot of drinks and coffees and figuring this out. His body language shifted as only as sort of a natural salesperson's can. And he was like, can you stay for dinner? Uh, and so I did. And he told me about this thing he was starting called Enjoy the Work. And his journey was different but similar in that he'd built a number of companies, some to great success, and was being called on to be the replacement CEO for companies where the company had outgrown their CEO. And after kind of studying that for a while, was like, well, that's stupid. Companies are more successful if the CEO stays in the chair. So what is the gap? And that is what he started obsessing with. It was like, how do I teach CEOs to bridge that gap before their board fires them? Because that's what happens, right? Once you've built a thing that people want, if your company grows and you don't, you will get fired. And we know that not only is the founding team, but the company is better off if the founder stays in the chair. So he was starting with this idea. And it took me about 6 months of that conversation to fall in love with the idea that we could teach founders how to be CEOs and that there was a pedagogy and that is the highest paid job for which there is no formal training. And that is bleeping stupid. And I've spent the last 6 years trying to fix that.
And so I love that, first of all. And there's so many people that I wish that were on the call that are founders that I know that would really benefit from this from this conversation. Um, what I can report to them later and have them watch later, distinguishing between the traits and skills between a founder and a CEO. You spoke about that already toward the beginning and then a little now. What single CEO skill, if you were to isolate just one, unlocks the biggest productivity gains and is best um, for for the myriad of projects and programs that are that a CEO has to deal with?
One skill. Well, I'll start by giving you the three categories of skills, and then we'll choose one along the way together. Uh,
Love it.
you know, a CEO reductively has three jobs, right? They hire well and take those people and turn them into a team. They set the vision for the company, and they resource the company. So, where are we going? Who's going to help me? And what fuel? That is reductively what they do. Of those three, if I had to choose one, I'd probably choose team. Because if you
Mhm.
have an amazing group of people who see themselves as a cohesive unit, I'll come back to that word, a tribe, you can probably collectively solve the other two. But vision without team and, and resources without team doesn't matter at all. Right. And I
Mm.
think when I arrived, and this is probably another, lesson from Salesforce, but underscored by enjoy the work. when I arrived at Salesforce, I was more of a scientist and I really didn't understand the strategic value of culture. And that company and where I've seen it succeed and fail with our Enjoy the Work portfolio companies has completely changed my mind on the strategic value of culture.
Mm. I love
But most
that.
people are terrible at hiring, Jen.
I mean, because that interview process is so flawed in so many ways. You know, you can look so good and shine so well, but really not have the skill or, like you said, the character, the values that match the organization, you know. So what advice would you give to those who are in the hiring seat
Yeah.
to find that great team? What could they do? What could we do?
So I'll continue borrowing from the greats. There's a methodology we like called the Who method. And it really starts with usually if I'm like, we need to hire I don't know, a designer. Let's just pick a role. The first thing people will do is write a JD. And it'll say, like, they should have 5 years of experience in this. They should have worked in these softwares, all of that. That is step 3 or 4. It's not step 1. Step 1 is what do we hope, and you're going to notice some consistency here. What do we hope will be true 6 months from now, a year from now, as a result of hiring this person? What changes because we have this person? And write those down. And by the way, anyone else on that's sort of close to the hiring, whether like let's say you're the hiring manager, but you have a boss or you're in product and you have an engineering lead who's sort of your partner in crime or your CEO, each write those down. What am I hoping to achieve by hiring this human? What are you hoping to achieve by hiring this human? Do them separately and compare notes.
Mm.
More often than not, you will not agree. Like, and I see this all the time, especially in roles like I'll hear this all the time from a founder. We need to hire a marketer. And I'm like, that's like saying we need to hire a human. Like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, are you looking for someone who's an expert in social media because you're trying to increase sort of your audience? Are you looking for someone who's going to really work on your brand identity? Like, what are you trying to achieve? And so taking the 2 or 3 people that are really big stakeholders in the role and writing down the objectives and how we will
Mm.
measure it beforehand and comparing will create alignment on the role. I think we've all experienced that, while we're in the process of interviewing people, we uncover that we didn't actually know what we wanted. And now you've just burned through the first 15, 20 people that could have been good. And they've had a bad candidate experience. Even if you call them
Mm.
back, they're like, you clearly don't know what you're doing. I'm not interested. And you're not going to get top talent. So getting that objective based job description agreed before you even go to the market is really important. And then people are just too polite about digging into people's backgrounds. They feel like maybe it's sort of rude to interrogate the resume. I'm a big believer, and again, this is from the Who method of not doing that. Of starting off with something like, "Hey, I really just want to understand your history in a really detailed way. We're going to go backwards in time through your resume, and for each one of these, I want to understand a few things. What were you hired to do? What was the situation when you got there? How did you do? Like what work went well and what went poorly, and how did you measure that? So for a sales guy, it might be like I exceeded quota 3 out of 4 years, whatever. What was the team like when you left? What would your manager say about you when I talked to him, when, not if? And why'd you leave? And we're going to go through the last umpteen years with that framework. Are you in? And if you kind of pre-message that that's what we're doing, they'll say, yep, I'm in. And now you don't leave going like, oh, John was such a nice guy. He was charming as hell. Yeah, he was charming as hell. He's a sales guy. That's his whole job is to be charming. Has he actually delivered? Has he grown a team? Were they better off? Did he get pulled into his next job rather than being pushed out of his last job? If you
Mm.
take some discipline through the hiring process, you're not going to find it afterwards that like, oh, actually, he can't do the work. And there's a lot more
Mm.
tricks than that. There's actually on our website, there's a whole hiring guide you can download if people want to check that out. But these are two of my sort of core pillars. Get really clear with everyone around the table about the objectives and be really methodical about going through their backgrounds.
Where could they find that? Just so we can reference that, where could they find that hiring
Yeah,
guide?
if you go to enjoythework.com, and you go to playbooks on the top or go to slash playbooks, you'll find a couple of our playbooks. I think there's a go-to-market one, there's a hiring one, and probably coming soon, there's a fundraising one.
Awesome. I love that. I love how open you are with sharing those playbooks. That's fantastic.
If we're all
Uh,
better at this, we're all better off.
Absolutely. That is very true. So for the other side of the table, what advice would you give to budding professionals who are out there interviewing? Obviously, we know the job market is tricky right now for various reasons. Oh, thank you, Mike. Just put it in the
Okay.
chat.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to budding professionals, considering all you know and the different hats that you've worn and what you're doing now at Enjoy the Work?
Yeah, I think I'll come back to strong beliefs weakly held. Like you probably have an idea of what you're going to want to do, but you're also wrong. Um, I I don't think that this career was anywhere on my bingo card 20, 30 years ago at all. So just being able to um, sort of explore richly. I mean, if we come back to know your stage, if you're still figuring out your own personal product market fit, you don't need to be over optimizing every little thing down the path for it. I think people also underestimate the willingness of people to have a coffee conversation. If you go on LinkedIn and send anyone, I know works for me, of like, hey, I'm, so and so, and I see we have this thing in common. I don't care what it is, right? Like we both follow this person on socials, or we both went to this school, or we both live in Coal Valley, whatever the thing is. Um, I'm really fascinated by what you do, and I'm curious if you would just be willing to have a virtual or regular coffee. 9 out of 10 times they're gonna say yes, right? Like there are stories of Steve Jobs famously replying to requests like that. They will say yes. People love to feel like, oh, you're so admired, and they love to pay it forward. And at the end of that
Mhm.
conversation, say, who are two other people I should talk to? Right? Like just
Love that.
ask. People can say no. I think we are afraid that we're being rude because we're putting someone in an imposition. You're talking to a grown adult. If they don't want to do a thing, they're not going to do it. But you get exactly none of what you don't ask for.
Yes, I love that. And I especially love when I get those queries on LinkedIn messages when they say a time of how long. And when it's 15 to 20 minutes, it's a yes for me all the way. When it's an hour, I hesitate to mark it as unread because maybe I'll get to that later. But when they
Yeah.
say 20 minutes, I'm there, I'm there. That's a great advice. Absolutely. I'd love for our audience to queue up some questions in the chat while I ask this second to last question here. So if you have any questions for Leslie, please put them in there. We'll be keeping an eye on that. Um, Currently, what project are you working on now that you're most excited about? I know there's probably not too much you could tell us about certain things you're working on in Enjoy the Work, but whatever you could share would be awesome.
Sure. Well, I won't tell you about my founders because those are their stories to share. I will tell you that I've started playing with something I call Super Advisor. Not a surprise that AI is a little bit of a thing right now, and that maybe I care about it a little bit. We spent some time actually at our most recent offsite thinking about what parts of our job can an AI do, and where is a human needed? And to some extent, this is borrowed from one of my portfolio companies, a company called Work Helix, has some academic founders from Stanford and MIT, and Penn, and they've sort of put forward this idea that a job is the wrong unit of discussion. It is a job is just a collection of tasks. And if
Mm,
instead we think about which tasks can an AI do versus which task can a human do, then it's not a question of like this job is going away. It's like this job is changing because there's parts of this that are still uniquely human. So borrowing from that idea and thinking about the work that I do, right? Like you don't need a human to say like I'll just pick something, what the average Series A valuation was last year. A machine is great at that kind of thing. You
true.
do need a human to figure out like, oh, what is actually around the corner for you and what message do you need to hear? And are you like in an emotional place to hear it? And given that round size and given what we know about the company, what should your strategy be? Anyway, that's a long way of saying that I've been feeding a lot of our content, things like these playbooks that I mentioned. We have a large repository of content and playbooks and frameworks in Notion. We use Slack every day with our founders and feeding that into an AI that I call Super Advisor, so that, as we are in the world of recording meetings, I can use that to help my founders faster and more efficiently. And just playing with the tools that are available there. We're building it in Lovable, which is a prompt-based engineering tool, and it's just a miracle.
Yes, and Lovable had a free weekend that I was playing with. It was, I think it was, I don't know how long. I found that it was free for the last 20 hours. So I was Lovabling it up this weekend.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We have a question here in the chat from Shaheen Massian. Hi, Shaheen. How would you create an interest in someone else on the team who is working for money, not
Mhm.
to fulfill passion?
That's a good question, and I'll start with the idea that you can't create interest for someone else. What you can do is discover their interest, right? So this starts with curiosity. What do they care about? Why are they there? Why does money matter? And if they're going to say it's just the money, cool, why? To some extent, if they really are just mercenaries, there's not a lot you can do about that. And I would argue in that case, what you should be doing is thinking about how to not have them on your team. But start with curiosity of what their passion is, and why this matters to them. Especially with smaller companies, we don't work at smaller companies for the money or the benefits. We would work at HP or IBM or the U.S. government, something that just kind of like it's an easy job. People work for smaller teams because they're interested in mastery, and autonomy, and agency, and finding those for them. Like, what is it that you want to learn? What is it that you want to own? What is it you want to be great at? What excites you about our vision? Those are the places that you're going to find spark.
That is brilliant. And what I'll say is that for the first time ever, I was asked that question by a shout out to Rick Hefner, our executive director at Center for Technology and Management Education. He asked me that question. He said, what excites you? What do you want to do? What projects do you want to work on? And that led to a new role that I have yet to announce. But it's wonderful for leaders to shape their teams in that way because like you said, you get to determine, is this the right person for the team, and how could we leverage their interests and their curiosity, in
And
a
how do
way
you feel
that's
about Rick right now?
he's, you know what I mean? Like I want to make Rick look good. I want to make the program look good. And I respect him so much because I feel that mutual respect, and now I feel like he's on the team, on not on he's on my team, but that
He's
I'm
on
on
your
his team.
personal team.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I feel a part of the tribe,
Right.
to go back to what you had said before. Yeah,
Yeah,
fantastic.
people
Yeah,
accept jobs and they quit managers. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So Leslie, how can our audience follow you?
Sure. Well, we have the URL here for playbooks. That is home base is enjoy the work. I'm also all over LinkedIn. Relatively light poster on places like Instagram, but I'm sure that you have my LinkedIn URL as well. Happy to share it. And if I can help anybody, with their startup or their management problems or any of that, they're welcome to reach out to me. It's just Leslie, Leslie, at enjoythework.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I had a wonderful conversation with you. I want to know what are some questions that you hope those who contact you, what are some of your favorite questions that budding founders ask you, just to wrap it up. What are some of your favorites?
Well, I'll sidestep the question and not talk about favorite questions, but favorite archetypes of human. Um, None of us are done being formed, and people who can show up with the curiosity of like, what am I not seeing? I know where I want to get to, and I don't know how to get there, and I'm not well equipped to do it, and I could really use an outside perspective. I'll have those conversations all day long.
Love it. Love
Yeah.
it. Well, thank you so much, everyone. As you can see, there were, I see a lot of really wonderful comments here about your response to that question. Thank you so much, Leslie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a great day.